Hey everyone, so in Parshat Tzav's discussion of the different korbanos, specifically in the discussion of korban shlomim, the Torah introduces the rule of pigul. Now the Torah tells us that when it comes to korban shlomim, I have to eat the korban shlomim yom v'layla v'yom. I have 2 days and 1 night to eat the actual meat, and if I don't do it, I instead eat it by yom hashlishi on the 3rd day, then the korban is considered pigul. But Chazal step in and tell us this isn't the actual explanation of the psukim. And when it comes to the rule of pigul, the rule of pigul isn't when I actually ate the meat of the korban on the 3rd day outside of the proper designated time frame, but rather I intended to eat the korban on the 3rd day outside of the proper designated time frame. Meaning back on the 1st day, back when the Kohen was originally bringing the korban, and he was either shechting it, or he was collecting the blood in a bowl, or he was walking that blood over to the mizbeach, or he was sprinkling that blood over on the mizbeach, while the Kohen was doing one of those 4 actions, if he had the faulty, improper kavanah, the improper intentions to eat the meat not within the designated time frame, but rather on the 3rd day, then that faulty kavanah has rendered this korban pigul, and it has made it invalid. And when the Mishnahs in the beginning of Masechet Tzvachim are speaking about this rule of pigul, which the Mishnahs call chutz lizmano, outside of the proper time frame, it pairs it with another rule of chutz limkomo, outside of the proper place. Meaning chutz limkomo is another kind of faulty intention. When the Kohen is bringing the korban, he has faulty intention, but this time the faulty intention is not to eat the meat of the korban outside of the proper time frame, but rather to eat the korban outside of the proper designated location. Depending on the korban, some korbanos have to be eaten within the Beis HaMikdash, some korbanos are able to be eaten anywhere in Yerushalayim. But if the Kohen had kavanah to eat this specific korban outside of its proper designated location, then the korban is also invalid. That's called chutz limkomo. And both chutz lizmano and chutz limkomo are different kinds of faulty intentions, and they both invalidate the korban, except there's one glaring difference that we have to point out. When it comes to the rules of chutz limkomo, I have intention to eat the korban outside of the proper place, and the korban is invalid, and I have violated a law, a negative prohibition. But when it comes to the rules of chutz lizmano, I intend to eat the korban outside of the proper time period, then yes, the korban is invalid. But my punishment is not just that I have violated a regular law, but rather I get karis. I get cut off, either in this world, either in the next world. Whole discussions of karis are not for now, but the point is it's much more scary, and it's much more serious than the regular law you get for violating chutz limkomo. So why is it that if both chutz limkomo and chutz lizmano are just faulty intentions, that chutz lizmano is considered so much worse than chutz limkomo? So Rav Hirsch steps in and Rav Hirsch suggests an answer. Rav Hirsch says that the whole point of korbanos in general is, as the name implies, to be makriv, to make ourselves close to God. And that's the reason why Rav Hirsch explains there's a time frame, there's designated locations in which, where and when we're allowed to eat korbanos. Because we want to make sure that both the eating our korbanos, both in time and in space, are close to God, are close to the Beis HaMikdash, are close to the mizbeach on which we brought the korban. And if I intend to eat my korban way too late, outside in a time period that's super far away, or I intend to eat my korban way too far away in a location that's super distant from the Beis HaMikdash, then these intentions are essentially saying that I don't actually want this korban to function as a korban, to function as an agent that is makrivoti, that brings me close to God. I intend for this korban, both in time, whether in time or in space, to actually make me distant from God. And that's why these faulty intentions invalidate the korban. But essentially, Rav Hirsch explains that there's a difference between the 2 kinds of faulty intentions. Because if I have the faulty intention to eat a korban chutz limkomo, I'm saying, I want to eat this korban in a location that's distant from God, and I'm going to go do this avera, this bad thing with a korban, in a place that's far away from God. But if I intend to eat my korban chutz lizmano outside of the proper time period, then yes, I'm still saying I'm intending on doing something wrong with this korban. But where are you intending to do something wrong with this korban? Not in a place that's far away from God, but rather right in God's presence, in God's face. And it's much more of a slap in God's face to do an avera with a korban when you're in His presence than to do it when you're out of God's presence. Essentially what Rav Hirsch is getting at is that there are better ways to do an avera and worse ways to do an avera. And it's better to do an avera when you're not in God's presence than when you are in God's presence. It's a shocking Gemara that appears a couple times throughout Shas. It's Kiddushin and Chagiga and Moed Katan, I think, where Rabbi Eli gives the following advice, that if a person is being overtaken by their Yetzer Hara and they really, really, really want to sin, what's the advice Rabbi Eli gives? That this person should put on black clothes and go to a location, a city where no one knows him, and do the Avera there. And that way he's going to avoid being Mechalal Shem Shamayim b'Dvar Hesed, to publicly desecrate God's name. It's a strange piece of advice. Why is Rabbi Eli telling us this is how you should do an Avera? Giving us the best way to do an Avera. All the commentaries point out that it's not that Rabbi Eli is telling us that if you do take these steps, suddenly the Avera becomes permissible. But rather, this is the way of doing an Avera that's the least bad. And hopefully the goal is that if you do an Avera in this way, it's going to prevent you from doing more Averas. What does this all mean? If we live a life where we pretend that we're supposed to be perfect, we're never allowed to make any mistakes, and the moment we make one mistake, the moment we're imperfect, what's the point of trying anymore? Right? Because I've already been stained, and therefore I might as well just continue staining myself. And the way that manifests itself when it comes to Averos is that if I think I'm never allowed to make any mistakes, the moment I do one thing wrong, even if it's a small, seemingly insignificant thing, then there's no point in trying anymore. And then I'll start spiraling out of control. And then I'll do a thing that's even worse, something that's even worse, and a thing that's even horrific. Because if I live this black and white world where I'm supposed to be perfect, then any small imperfection becomes magnified in my mind to the greatest degree, and therefore there's no difference between the small things and the big things anymore, and the small things are going to lead me to do things that are even worse, because once I'm imperfect, there's no point in me trying to be perfect anymore. But that's not true when it comes to Avodas Hashem, and that's not what Rabbi Eli is teaching us, and that's not what the rules of Chutzim Koma and Chutzim Zmana were teaching us. Essentially, there are better ways of doing an Avera. And if we recognize that we're not supposed to be perfect, but it's okay for us to make mistakes, and we allow ourselves to be vulnerable like that, and admit that we're going to make mistakes, then that's the way we're going to catch ourselves. And make sure that one small mistake doesn't allow us to stumble out of control and start doing an even worse mistake. By being vulnerable and admitting we're not perfect, we're actually helping us long term because we're preventing ourselves from doing things that are even worse. Essentially, it's better to do an Avera Chutzim Komo in a place that's distant from God and kind of like get it out of the way, but then stop yourself. And that way you won't end up brazenly violating an Avera Chutz Lizmano in God's presence. Something to think about over Shabbos, and in general, when we're figuring out our connection with Hashem and our relationship to mitzvos and Averos. Let me know if you have any thoughts. Have a great Shabbos, everyone. Bye-bye.